বেবিস, হ্যালো সোনারা। তোমাদের কি বলবো, কি কথা বলবো তোমাদের সঙ্গে আমি ঠিক বুঝে উঠতে পারছি না। সেই দিন জন্মদিনের দিন তোমরা এত সুইট সুইট মেসেজেস দিলে, এত কিউট কিউট মেসেজেস দিলে, সবাই মিলে হ্যালো কাকিমা, শুভেচ্ছা জানালে, হ্যাপি বার্থডে, ভালো থেকো, সুস্থ থেকো। তা আমি মনে করলাম, বাবলিও বললো, আমি মনে করলাম যে একটা কিছু তো দিই। কী দিই এই করোনার সময় কোথায় কে কাকে ধরে পড়ে। তাই জন্যেই আমি একটা ছোট্ট গল্প পড়ে শোনাচ্ছি তোমাদেরকে। তোমরা তো গল্প শুনতে ভালোবাসো, তোমাদের ছেলে মেয়েদেরও শোনাতে পারো। ইউ ক্যান অল সিট টুগেদার ইন আ ফ্যামিলি অ্যান্ড লিসেন টু দ্য স্টোরি। ইটস আ হিলেরিয়াস স্টোরি, একটু বড় কিন্তু তবু একটু ধৈর্য ধরে শোনো। রোয়াল্ড ডালের দ্য হিচহাইকার। হয়তো পড়েছো, হয়তো শুনেছ, তবু আরেকবার পড়ি, ওকে? দ্য হিচহাইকার, রোয়াল্ড ডালের। I had a new car. It was an exciting toy, a big BMW, 3.3 liters, which means 3.3 long wheelbase fuel injection. It had a top speed of 129 miles per hour and terrific acceleration. The body was pale blue, the seats inside were darker blue, and they were made of leather, genuine soft leather of the finest quality. The windows were electrically operated, and so was the sunroof. The roof aerial popped up when I switched on the radio and disappeared when I switched it off. The powerful engine growled and grunted impatiently at low speed, but at 60 miles an hour, the growling stopped and the motor began to purr with pleasure. Now, I was driving up to London, okay, by myself. It was a lovely June day. There were haymaking in the fields, and there were buttercups along both sides of the road. I was whispering along at 70 miles per hour, leaning back comfortably in my seat, with not more than a couple of fingers resting lightly on the wheelbase to keep her steady. Ahead of me, I saw a man thumbing a lift. Okay, I touched the brake and brought the car to a stop beside him. I always stopped for hitchhikers. I knew just how it used to feel to be standing on the side of a country road watching the cars go by. I hated the drivers for pretending that they did not see me. Yeah, that is what they did. I saw this, I always stopped for them. So now here I stopped. The large expensive cars seldom stopped. It was always the smaller ones that offered you a lift, or the rusty ones, or the ones that were already crammed full of children, and the driver would say, I think we can squeeze in one more. The hitchhiker poked his head through the open window and said, Going to London, governor? Yes, I said, jump in. He got in, and I drove on. He was a small, ratty-faced man with grey teeth. His eyes were dark and quick and clever like rat's eyes, and his ears were slightly pointed at the top. He had a cloth cap on his head and was wearing a greyish-coloured jacket with enormous pockets. The grey jacket, together with the quick eyes and pointed ears, made him look more than anything else like some sort of a big, huge human rat. What part of London are you headed for? I asked him. I'm going right through London, out on the other side, he said. I'm going to Epsom for the races. It's Derby Day, you know. Oh, so it is, I said. I wish I were going with you. I love betting on horses. I never bet on horses, he said. I don't even watch them. That's a stupid, silly business. Then why do you go? I asked. He didn't seem to like the question. The ratty little face went absolutely blank. And he sat there, staring straight ahead at the road, saying nothing. I expect you help to work the betting machines or something like that, I said. That's even sillier, he answered. There's no fun working them lousy machines and selling tickets to mugs. Any fool could do that. There was a long silence. I decided not to question him anymore. I remember how it irritated me in my hitchhiking days when drivers kept asking me questions. Where are you going? Why are you doing there? What's your job? Are you married? Do you have a girlfriend? What's her name? How old are you? And so on and so forth. I used to hate it. I'm sorry, I said, it's none of my business what you do. The trouble is that I am a writer and most writers are nosy. You write books? He asked. Oh, yes. Writing books is okay, he said. It's what I called a skilled trade. I am in a skilled trade too. The folks I despise is them that spend all their lives doing crummy old routine jobs with no skill in them at all. You see what I mean? Yes. The secret of life, he said, is to become very, very good at something that's very hard to do. Like you, I said. Exactly. You and me both. What makes you think that I am any good at my job? I asked. There's an awful lot of bad writers all around. You wouldn't be driving about in that car like this if you weren't any good at writing. It must be a tidy pocket, this little job of yours. Ah, it wasn't cheap. What can she do, flat out? He asked. 129 miles an hour, I told him. Ah, I bet she won't. I bet she will. All car makers are liars. You can buy any car you like and it'll never do what the makers say it will. This one will. Open her up, then prove it. Go on, Governor. Open her up and let's see what she will do. There is a terrific circle at Charlton Front, St. Peter's. And immediately beyond, there's a long straight section of divided highway. We came out of the circle onto the highway and I pressed my foot hard down on the accelerator. The big car leaped forward as though it had been stung. In 10 seconds or so, we were doing 90. Lovely, he cried. Beautiful. Keep going. I had the accelerator jammed down against the floor and I held it there. 100, he shouted. 105. Come on, 110, 115. Go on, don't slack. I was in the outer lane and we flashed past several cars as though they were standing still. A green Mini, a big cream-colored Citroen, a white Land Rover, a huge truck with a container on its back, an orange-colored Volkswagen minibus. 120, my passenger shouted, jumping up and down. Go on, get her up to 129. At that moment, I heard the scream of a police siren. It was so loud that it seemed to be right inside the car. And then a cop on a motorcycle loomed up alongside us in the inside lane and went past us and raised a hand for us to stop. Oh, my sainted aunt, I said, that's torn it. The cop must have been doing about 130 because when he passed us and he took plenty of time slowing down. Finally, he pulled up to the side of the road and I pulled up behind him. I didn't know that motorcycles could go that fast, I said lamely. That one can, my passenger said. It's the same make as yours. It's a BMW. The fastest bike on the road, and that's what they are using nowadays. The cop went off the motorcycle, leaned the machine sideways onto its prop stand, and then he took off his gloves and placed them carefully on the seat. He was in no hurry now. He had us where he wanted us, and he knew it. This is real trouble, I said. I don't like it one bit. Don't talk to him more than necessary, you understand? My companion said. Just sit tight and keep mum. Like an executioner approaching his victim, the cop came strolling slowly towards us. He was a big, meaty man with a belly, and his blue breeches were skin tight around his enormous thighs. His goggles were pulled up onto the helmet, showing a smouldering red face with wide cheeks. We sat there like guilty schoolboys waiting for him to arrive. Watch out for this man, my passenger whispered. He looks as mean as the devil. The cop came around to my open window and placed one meaty hand on the sill. Hey, what's the hurry? He said. No hurry, officer, I answered. No, perhaps. There's a woman at the back seat having a baby and you are rushing her to the hospital, is that it? No, officer. Oh, perhaps your house is on fire and you are dashing home to rescue the family from upstairs? His voice was dangerously soft and mocking. My house isn't on fire, officer. In that case, he said, you've got yourself into a nasty mess, haven't you? Do you know what the speed limit is in this country? 70, I said. And do you mind telling me exactly what speed you were doing just now? I shrugged and didn't say anything. I don't know. When he spoke next, he raised his voice so loud that I jumped. 120 miles per hour, he barked. That is 50 miles an hour over the limit. He turned his head and spat out a big gob of spit. It landed on the wing of my car and started sliding down over my beautiful blue paint. And then he turned back again and stared hard at my passenger. And who are you? Who are you? He's a hitchhiker, I said. I'm giving him a lift. I didn't ask you. I asked him. Have I done anything wrong? My passenger asked. His voice was soft and oily as hair cream. That's more than likely, the cop said. Anyway, you are a witness. I'll deal with you in a minute. Wait. Driver's license? He snapped, holding out his hand. I gave him my driver's license. He unbuttoned the left-hand breast pocket of his tunic and brought out the dreaded book of tickets. Carefully, he copied the name and address from my license, then he gave it back to me. He strolled around to the front of the car and read the number from the license plate and wrote that down. He filled in the date, the time, and the details of my offense. Then he tore out the top copy of the ticket, but before handing it to me, he checked out that all the information had come through clearly on his own carbon copy. Finally, he replaced the book in his breast pocket, fastened the button. Now you, he said to my passenger, and he walked around to the other side of the car. From the other breast pocket, he produced a small black notebook. Name, he said. Come on, name. Michael Fish, my passenger said. Address, 14 Windsor Lane, Luton. Show me something to prove that this is your real name and this is your real address, the policeman said. My passenger fished out from his pocket a driver's license of his own. The policeman checked the name and address and handed it back to him. Your job? He asked sharply. I am an odd carrier. A what? An odd carrier. Spell it. HODCA. That'll do. And what's a hod carrier, may I know? An odd carrier officer is a person who carries the cement up the ladder to the bricklayer, and the odd is what he carries it in. It's got a long handle, and on the top you've got bits of okay, all right. Who is your employer? Don't have one. I'm unemployed. The cop wrote this down in the back notebook. Then he returned the book to his breast pocket and undid the button. When I get back to the station, I'm going to do a little bit of checking up on this, said my passenger. Me, what have I done? The rat-faced man asked. I don't like your face, that's all. And we might just have a picture of it somewhere in our files. He strolled round the car and returned to my window. I suppose you know that you're in serious trouble, huh? Yes, officer. You won't be driving this fancy car of yours again for a very long time. Not after we have finished with you. You won't be driving any car again, coming to that, for several years. And a good thing too. I hope they lock you up for a spell into the bargain. You mean prison? I asked aloud. Absolutely, he said, smacking his lips. In the clink, behind the bars, along with all the other criminals who break the law, and a hefty fine into the bargain. Nobody will be more pleased about that than me. I'll see you in the court, both of you. You will be getting a summons to appear. He turned and walked over to his motorcycle, flipped the prop stand back into the position with his foot and swung his leg over the saddle. And then he kicked the starter and rode off up the road, out of sight. Phew, I gasped, that's done it. We was caught, my passenger said. We was caught, good and proper. I was caught, you mean? That's right, he said. What are you going to do now, Governor? I'm going straight up to London to talk to my solicitor, I said. I started my car and drove on. You mustn't believe what he said about you going to prison, my passenger said. They don't put anybody in prison just for speeding. Are you sure? I asked. I am positive, he answered. They can take your license, they can give you a whooping big fine, but that will be the end of it. No prison. I felt tremendously relieved. Oof, by the way, I said, why did you lie to him? Who, me? He said. What makes you think I lied? You told him you were unemployed and you were a hod carrier, but you told me just now that you were in a highly skilled trade. So am I. But I didn't tell it to everyone and not to a copper. So what do you do? I asked him. Ah, he said shyly. That will be telling me, wouldn't it? Is it something you are ashamed of? Ashamed? Huh? Me, ashamed of my job. I am about as proud of it as anybody could be in the entire world. Then why don't you tell me? Oh, you writers really is nosy packers, aren't you? He said. And you ain't going to be happy, I don't think, until you have found out exactly what the answer is. I don't really care, one way or the other, I told him. He gave me a crafty look out of the side of his eyes. I think you do care. I can see it in your face that you think I'm in some kind of a peculiar trade, and you think, and you're just aching to know what it is. I didn't like the way he read my thoughts, so I kept quiet and stared at the road in front of me. You'd be right too. I'm in a very peculiar trade. I'm in the peculiarest trade of them all. Trade of M all. I waited for him to go on. That's why I asked to be extra careful who I am talking to. You see? How am I to know, for instance, that you are not another copper in plain clothes? Huh? Hey, do I look like a copper? No, he said, you don't. Any fool could tell that. He took from his pocket a tin of tobacco and a packet of cigarette papers and started to roll a cigarette. I was watching him out of the corner of my eye, and the speed with which he performed this rather difficult operation was incredible. The cigarette was rolled and ready in about 5 seconds. He ran his tongue along the edge of the paper, stuck it down, popped the cigarette between his lips, and then, as if from nowhere, a lighter appeared in his hand. The lighter was flamed, the cigarette was lit, the lighter disappeared. Oops, it was altogether a remarkable performance. I have never seen anyone roll a cigarette as fast as that, I said. Ah, he said, taking a deep suck of smoke. So you noticed, huh? Of course I noticed. It was quite fantastic. Sorry. He sat back and smiled. It pleased him very much that I had noticed how quickly he could roll a cigarette. You want to know what makes me able to do it? He said. Go on, tell me. It is because I have fantastic fingers. These fingers of mine, he said, holding up both hands in front of him, are quicker and cleverer than the fingers of the best piano player in town. Are you a piano player? I glanced at his fingers. They were so beautifully shaped, so slim and long and elegant. They didn't seem to be belonging to the rest of him. They looked like the fingers of a brain surgeon or a watchmaker. My job, he said, is 100 times more difficult than playing the piano. Any twerp can learn to do that. There's titchy little kids learning to play the piano at almost any house you go to. That's right, ain't it? More or less, I said. Of course it's right. But there's not one person in 10 million can learn to do what I can. Not one in 10 million. How about that? Amazing, I said. You're done right. It's amazing. I think I know now what you do, I said. You do conjuring tricks. You are a conjurer, huh? Me? He snorted. A conjurer? Can you picture me going around crummy kids' parties making rabbits come out from the top of their hats? No, then you are a card player. You get people into card games and you deal yourself a marvelous hand. Me, a rotten card sharper, he asked. That's a miserable racket if ever there was any. All right, I give up. I don't know what trade you are in. I was taking the car along slowly now at no more than 40 miles an hour to make sure I wasn't stopped again. We had come into the main Oxford-London road and were running down the hill towards Denham. Suddenly my passenger was holding up a black leather belt in his hand. Ever seen this before? He asked. The belt had a brass buckle of unusual design. Hey, I said, that's my belt. Oi, where did you get it? He grinned and waved the belt gently from side to side. Where do you think I got it, Governor? Off from the top of your trousers, of course. I reached down, felt my belt. God, it was gone. You mean you took it off while we were driving along the... I asked, flabbergasted. He nodded, watching me all the time, with those little black ratty eyes. That's impossible. You would have had to undo the buckle, slide the whole thing out through the loops of all the way round. I would have seen you doing it. Even if I had not seen you, I would have felt it. Ah, but you didn't see, you didn't feel, he said triumphantly. He dropped the belt on his lap, and now at once there was a brown shoelace dangling from his fingers. And what about this? What about it? I asked. Anyone here missing a shoelace? He asked. I glanced down at my shoes. Oh, the lace of one of them was missing. Good grief, I said. How did you do that? I never saw you bending down. Oh, you never saw nothing, he said. You never saw me move an inch. And you know why? Yes, because you have fantastic fingers. Exactly right. You catch on pretty quick, Governor. He sat back and sucked away at his homemade cigarette, blowing the smoke out in a thin stream against the windshield. He knew he had impressed me greatly with those two tricks, and this made him very happy. I don't want to be late, he said. What time is it? There's a clock in front of you, I told him. I don't trust. I don't trust car clocks. What does your watch say? I hitched up my sleeve to look at my watch. It wasn't there. I looked at the man. He looked back at me, grinning. You've taken that too? Huh? I asked. He held out his hand, and there was my watch lying in his palm. Nice bit of stuff, he said. Superior quality, huh? 18-karat gold. Easy to sell too. It's never any trouble getting rid of quality goods. See, I'd like it back, please, if you don't mind, I said rather huffily. He placed the watch carefully on the leather tray in front of him. I wouldn't nick anything from you, Governor, he said. You're my pal. You've given me a lift. I'm glad to hear that, I said. All I'm doing is answering your question, he went on. You asked me what I do for a living, and I am showing it to you. See, what else have you got of mine? I asked him. He smiled again, and now he started to take from the pocket of his jacket one thing after another that belonged to me. My driver's license, a key ring with 4 keys in it, some pound notes, a few coins, a letter from my publishers, my diary, a stubby old pencil, a cigarette lighter, and last of all a beautiful old sapphire ring with pearls around it belonging to my wife. I was taking the ring up to a jeweller's in London because one of the pearls was missing. Now there's another lovely piece of good, he said, turning the ring over. That is 18th century, if I am not mistaken, from the reign of King George III. You're right, I said, impressed. Absolutely right. He put the ring on the leather tray along with the other items. So you're a pickpocket, huh? I said. I don't like that word. I don't like that word. It's a coarse and vulgar word. Pickpockets is coarse and vulgar people who do easy little amateur jobs. They lift money from blind old ladies. Then what do you call yourself? I asked. Me? I'm a fingersmith. I'm a professional fingersmith. He spoke the words solemnly and proudly as though he were telling me that he was the president of the Royal College of Surgeons or the Archbishop of Canterbury. I've never heard that word before, I said. Did you invent it? Of course I didn't invent it. It's the name given to them who have risen to the very top of any profession. You've heard of a goldsmith. You've heard of a silversmith, for instance. They're experts with gold and silver. I am an expert with my fingers, so I'm a fingersmith. Must be an interesting job. It's a marvelous job, he answered. It's lovely, and that's why you go to the races. Race meetings is easy meat, he said. Just stand around after the race, watching for the lucky ones to queue up and draw their money. And when you see someone collecting a big bundle of notes, you just simply follow him and help yourself. But don't get me wrong, Governor. I never take nothing from a loser, nor from poor people neither. I only go after them who can afford it, the winners and the rich. That's very thoughtful of you, I said. How often do you get caught? Caught, he said. Me, get caught. It's only the pickpockets who get caught. Fingersmiths never. Listen, I could take the false teeth out from your mouth if I wanted, and you would never even catch me. Ah, I don't have false teeth, I said. I know you didn't. I know you don't, he answered. Otherwise, I would have had them out long ago. I believed him. I believed him. Those long, slim fingers of his seemed to be able to do anything. We drove on for a while without talking. The policeman's got to check up on you pretty thoroughly, I said. Doesn't that worry you a bit? Nobody's checking up on me, he said. Of course they are. He has got your name, he has got your address, written down carefully in his black book. The man gave me another of his ratty smiles and said, ah, he says. So he has. But I bet he ain't got everything written down in his memory as well. I have never known a copper yet with a decent memory. Some of them can't even remember their own names. What has memory got to do with it, I asked. It's written down in his black book, isn't it? Yes, Governor, it is. But the trouble is that he has lost both the books. And the one with my name on it and the one with your name on it. In the long, delicate fingers of the right hand, the man was holding up in triumph the two books he had taken from the policeman's pocket. Easiest job I've ever done in my whole life, he announced proudly. I nearly swerved the car into the milk truck. I was so excited. The coppers got nothing on either of us, he said. Oh, you're a genius, I cried. He's got no names, he's got no address, he's got no car number, no nothing. Oh, you're brilliant. I think you'd better pull off this main road. And as soon as possible, he said, we'd better build a big bonfire and burn these books. You're a fantastic fellow, I exclaimed. Thank you, Governor, he said. It's always nice to be appreciated. Valuna?